Hello and welcome back to Get Real with Jack and Cindy. I'm Cindy Morrison.
And I'm Jack Wallace. Hello, everybody.
So, how are you?
I'm good. I'm really good.
You have had a whirlwind couple of weeks here.
It's been crazy, but it's been worth it. Been very fun. Yeah.
So, what many people may not know about Jack is you were actually in the movie The Outsiders.
I'm going there.
Well, I just think it ties in
It
so.
was interesting. Yeah, I was. They it was they had like 10 or 15 full-time soc and full-time greaser extras, and so we were on the set the majority of the time.
Oh, cool.
There were lots of people that were extras in the movie, obviously from the community, but there were those of us that were actually picked to be kind of ready to go.
Mhm.
So yeah, so the scene that I ended up making, I got cut from the Rumble because I was so small, because I was like 12 or 13 and I was like this big around. So they were really afraid I was going to get hurt, so they cut me from that scene. And it's good because like two people broke their nose that night. So I was like, okay, I'm really glad that they cut me.
Shoo!
But I'm in the drive-in scene, and right before Diane Lane and Thomas Howe go to buy a hot dog, I walk by my 12-year-old skinny, tall looking. It's weird how in film I look tall, but self walks by, and it's like a full. So forever I will have my 12-year-old self on film. It
I
was
love
yeah. So
that.
it's cool. It was very cool.
Well, and if you're wondering why I took us down a trip to memory lane, you actually went to Broadway to see The Outsiders.
Yes, yeah. So friends of mine, Ryan and Jay, Tanager Entertainment, and they're in the producing teams. I think they're kind of like the main producers. I think, I don't know that for sure, but they are involved in it, obviously. And then a bunch of, it's an amazing Broadway show.
Really?
Honestly, I was expecting it to be good, and you really hoping for it to be good,
Hmm.
and it was unbelievably good. Yeah, it's
Really?
crazy. And then speaking of the Rumble scene,
Uh-huh.
like the Rumble scene was incredible. And then I was working with a lot of people that are Broadway people, like really, Broadway people for the rest of the week on other stuff. And all they could talk about was The Outsiders. So it's getting great buzz. So
That's
yeah, it's
awesome.
exciting for Tulsa.
Now, is the production company, are they out of Oklahoma? How did they become interested in The Outsiders?
I think they may have kind of fostered the idea. I mean,
Okay.
yeah. So, but I mean, they've produced Waitress and Come From Away and a revival of Pippin. So, I mean, they've done a lot of other things. So, this is their latest project. And then they're also one of the producers on Queen of Versailles with Kristen coming up. So,
In fact,
yeah.
they were here at the event,
Yeah, they
the
live here.
concert.
Yeah,
Oh,
they're
they
from
do
here.
live
Yeah,
here.
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah,
so
yeah. And then
cool.
it's also funny because Kristen wore so the Outsiders, when I was 12 years old, I was tiny, and they gave me a T-shirt that I've had forever. It's then the orange and says Outsiders and then Soch on the back, and I had it in a like shadow box in my garage. And Kristen was at my house a couple of years ago, and she said, "I want that. I want to wear that." And so we took it out, but she wore it to the Outsiders Broadway,
I
like,
saw that on
yeah.
your
So it's really
Instagram.
kind of cool. It's like a full circle moment, to have been a part of the movie, and then all these years later have your best friend wearing the T-shirt and then I went as a greaser, so I wore my leather jacket.
Nice.
So I didn't want to be a Soch anymore. I can't escape. I mean, here I am. I'm such a Soch, but yeah.
Well, that
So
is so
it was
fun. That's
really
exciting.
really cool. And if you get to New York, go see it. I mean, it's so cool because it's a little bit of the harder, we're starting to really talk about some hard stuff from Tulsa's past and history, but
Mhm,
it is such a great, you know, story about Tulsa. I mean,
mhm.
and the mayor was there, and Angelina Jolie was there. I mean, there's it's great attention.
Cool.
Yeah, really cool. So that was actually the next night. I went the night before to the Oklahoma thing, but I know that the two of them were there for the opening. So yeah, really cool.
Just
Lots of
name dropping. I love
lots
it.
of well, I went there, so I can name drop. But and lots of Tulsa people were there,
Mhm.
so it was really cool,
That's
really cool.
awesome. Well, anyway, I wanted to talk about
Yeah,
that because that
it's
you
fun.
just literally have been running and running and running the gerbil on the wheel the last couple of
I have,
weeks.
yeah. So if I fall asleep during this, that's why. Yeah. No, just kidding. It's good
so,
to be home.
so we're going to do part two of listing your house.
Okay.
So last week we talked about basically from when you decide, okay, I'm going to sell my house, all the way up until the contract.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about the contract, multiple offers, what happens after you get the contract, because there's so many things that go into getting to the closing table.
Yeah.
So many steps.
It's actually, I think, interesting because we focus so much on getting things sold and advertising and marketing that we can sell your house. But the thing that you have to remember is getting your house sold is a big deal, obviously. But once it's sold, getting it closed can be an even bigger deal because there's so many things that can go wrong, so many personality things that can come into play. And so, yeah, that's a really important process to kind of grasp how it works. Now, for anyone who's from out of state, how it works here and how it works in your market may be very different because state to state, the process and the contracts are different. So this is probably kind of basically the way it works everywhere or pretty similar. But what we're going to be talking about is specific to our contract, which is state of Oklahoma standard contract.
Yes. All right. So your agent is doing open houses. You've gotten your house all staged and ready. So what does it look like when a contract comes in for the homeowner?
Well, it really depends. I mean, so let's just talk about where we've been, where we are, and where we're heading.
Okay.
In the past, where we were, it was, you would typically have a number of showings, and then, eventually, hopefully, somebody would like it enough that their agent would write up a contract. They would sign the contract, send it over, and then you negotiate back and forth with that agent for their client. So that, the two of us would be the intermediary, or if you're representing both sides, you would be in between the buyer and the seller. Then we got to where the market got so crazy and there was so little inventory and so many people and buyers, and interest rates were so low that it was kind of almost like an auction system. For a lot of houses, not for every house. So, if your house wasn't that house, that's not it. But there were a lot of houses that, they would go on the market, and within a day or two, you would have sometimes 20 offers. I mean, so then it was going through, and everyone always thinks, well, that just comes down to whoever offers the most money. But, there's a lot of things that are important other than just the bottom line of the dollar, like the closing date, how much they're asking for repairs, or are they asking for repairs? Do they have a contingency on their financing, or is it cash? Which, that was hurting a lot of younger buyers because there were a lot of cash buyers at that time that were scooping up properties. So
my buyer who was on the First Time Buyer TV show on Hulu, 10 offers.
Yeah.
10 offers. We just kept making offers. And she was, at that point, she was at FHA loan. She ended up flipping to conventional. She was able to do that.
Which is also, in that time period, FHA could be a little bit stricter because you have the appraisal, which is actually another inspection and appraisal with FHA that you don't really have with conventional. You just have an appraisal in conventional. So for a lot of people, they will accept conventional. They'll accept cash over anything, conventional over FHA or VA. So yeah, so that's the thing too. That's one reason why it's good to have an agent, because you wouldn't know that. There's a lot of good lenders who will direct you to in that situation. But if you're in the situation where you could go conventional in a market like that, you need to go conventional.
And that's what we had to do. And what I do,
which is hard because there were so many great FHA programs, and some people needed to just stick with it because they could get in for not a lot of money and they had a great rate. So.
Yes, exactly. Well, what I do, and I don't know how you do this, Jack, but if I have a property that has multiple offers, I don't look at them till it's time for us to, well, I take that back. I do look at them prior to, because I do a spreadsheet of what kind of loan it is, how much they're wanting to put in earnest money, those kinds of things. And then we go over it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I do it different depending on the client, because I think everyone kind of has a different way of processing. I didn't deal with that a whole lot, because I just didn't seem to have I didn't seem to have a lot of the listings that were in that category.
That price range that would
Yeah,
just,
yeah. So I
yeah.
mean, I obviously I did have some of that, um, but then when I did have that, the one thing that I really had to go through and get used to was going through and putting everything, you know, every single detail, like what was the financing, what was the closing date, what were the conditions, what were the contingencies, and it, like you said, it's a spreadsheet. It's not just this is the best one.
Right,
Because what
right.
I think is the best one, that may not be the best one for the seller, because the seller has their own, like maybe they want to close sooner, maybe they want to close later.
Or they don't want to pay closing costs, because you can have all
Mhm.
those seller concessions that they can,
Yeah.
a buyer can ask for. So until you really go through every part of the
Mhm.
contract to get the true picture of what this is like, you can't just look at the bottom line of the
And
money.
that's true whether it's a bidding situation or not. Like if everybody wants to know, obviously we all want to know what the bottom line on the price is, and that's human nature. But you really have to look at the whole approach and the organic nature of the whole offer.
Right. So, but generally, you're probably only going to get an offer. Now, right now, I think houses are on the market about 42 days on
Mhm.
average in
Yeah.
Tulsa. So we got really spoiled by things would only last a week.
Mhm.
But it is funny to me. Interest rates have gone up, but I have gotten multiple offers. Like at day 45, all of a sudden, sorry, my didn't pause my audio there. Um, now I gotta try to get back on track.
Multiple offers a day,
Multiple
40.
offers.
Yeah.
Oh, 40, sorry, folks. Yeah. No, but I still, it's funny to me, a house can sit on the market for
Yeah.
however many days. And sometimes you do get multiple offers. And I will
Yeah.
tell the agents, make sure you bring your highest and best. And it's funny, if a house is sat on the market, sometimes the buyers don't believe that you have other offers.
It's amazing to me through the years how many houses I've had that literally were on the market forever.
Mhm,
No one wanted them, and then on the same day,
mhm.
two people wanted, and people really get upset because they think they think you're playing a game, and then when it backfires on them, then they're mad at you because you didn't emphasize how much it was. I mean, it is really strange, but it is kind of like houses seem to be kind of like, once somebody wants it, then it's kind of like the thing. Don't If you have a house and you get an offer, don't just assume that, because it
Yeah.
doesn't always happen that way, but it is weird. And then also, I just think there's so many market factors now that come into play, like the interest rate may dip down just enough to where people lock in, and then everyone's sort of like, now we got to find the house.
Mhm.
So they may have been sitting on the fence kind of waiting for that, and then it happens at the same time, and there's like a lot of people doing that. So I think we've been very price sensitive,
Mhm.
and interest rate, not we have been we're always price sensitive. I think we've been very interest rate sensitive, and
Yes.
I think that's showing up a lot. So anytime we get those little dip downs or meltdowns,
Mhm.
then the market just gets kind of inundated, and then it's a little bit of a pullback. But I mean, I also think people are starting to get used to the rate. I mean, I'm
Mhm.
just seeing more.
I think they're tired of waiting for it to go
Yeah,
back
or
down.
or they have to. The other thing
Mhm.
too is a lot of people bought houses that were a lot higher than they really thought they could afford, and then now they're having to pay a whole lot more in heat and air, a lot more in insurance, a lot more in taxes, and they're like, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to give up a 3%, but I can't afford this house anymore. So
Mhm.
it's like they are having to trade down or sell off. So I mean, we're starting to see the market sort of start to heal itself. It's gonna take a while though, for
And
sure.
some advice I have for new agents out there is, don't look at, when you're turning in a contract and the negotiation of back and forth, that you're on opposite sides.
Yeah,
I
doesn't
think
work right now.
I think one of the keys to a successful negotiation is when you look at that other agent as a friend. Like,
Mhm.
let's work together to,
Partner.
yeah, to
Yeah.
get this worked out together. It shouldn't be adversarial, I don't think. You both want to represent your clients, and
Well,
as
the other
well as
thing is
possible.
we need to keep ourselves from becoming the emotional duplicates of our clients,
Oh
because
yeah.
I think that's what happens so much of the time, is that people come in, and the other thing too is like I think uh, there's no such thing as good news or bad news in real
Mhm.
estate. There's just news. I mean, it is
Mhm.
what it is. This is what you're dealing with. And so if I go in and say, oh my gosh, this is terrible. These people are kind of lowball you and this is really awful. And then you tell them the price, well, they automatically feel like they're being taken advantage of. But if you come in and say, here's what they're offering, and then close your mouth and let them process,
Mhm.
because I don't know. I mean, there's times in my life where I didn't think I would take a certain thing or a certain price on something, and then for whatever reason there comes a point when you're like, you know what, I'll take that. I'll be happy to take that at this point. So that I think you just have to be really careful in that respect, or going back and being mad or defensive with the other agent who,
Right.
how many times have people written offers that you're like, I wouldn't write that. I mean, that would not be what I would write, but I have to write that and I have to present that. Uh, my father was a famous lowballer,
Mhm.
and he would lowball, and if he didn't get it, he would be fine. And it was amazing how many times he did get it. It was amazing how many times people came back months later and said, you know what, we take it now.
Yeah.
And so I think you have to just get comfortable with the fact that that other person isn't necessarily doing what they would do, but they're doing what their client has asked them to do, and vice versa, and try to keep it as civil and as possible. And you're not going to work every deal to a completion, and that's
No.
okay. Like, I think the other thing is, like sometimes I think when people come in, it's like they're acting like, well, it's a deal. I'm like, well, it's a terrible deal. It is a deal, but it's an awful deal, and my people don't want that deal. But thank you, but
And
we're gonna pass.
we are required, because I even had a client once that was like, don't even bring me a lowball offer. I'm like, well,
Mhm.
I'm still gonna bring it to you because I'm required by law
Mhm.
to,
Yeah, I mean,
bring
you
all
can
these to
you
you.
can basically call them and say, "I'm sending you a dot loop. This is it. Do you want to consider it?" Like, I can say, "Here are the high points. It's in your email, but what do you want to do? Do you want to just say, like, And I honestly, I try to get people to always counter, even if it's a full price,
Mhm.
because
I-
you need to counter. I
Yeah.
mean, I think that it's important to not just. I don't think psychologically just walking away. Now, if you counter and they come back ridiculous again, then you can say, you know what, we're just not even close.
Mhm.
Um, and then you also have to be strategic too, because if somebody comes in really low and then you go, well, I'm just going to cut to the chase, oftentimes that hurts you.
Mhm.
Sometimes you have to match them a little bit,
Mhm.
because, there's all different styles. So, and that's where we can be a guide and help, because we do negotiate as a living.
Right.
Um,
We do
but
this every day, day in
yeah,
and day
and
out.
negotiation is a really important tool. And the one thing I will say is I do want to be friendly with the other agent, but I'm not going to be. I'm still negotiating.
Mhm.
So that's also why I like the non-emotional arm's length. And let's just, because if I come across as emotional, I'm giving a lot of information away.
Yeah. Oh, very true.
Like,
And I always look at a contract, no matter what it is, it's the start of a conversation.
absolutely.
So we got to start somewhere.
Uh-huh.
Contract's a perfect way to do that. I had one that a seller who was in his 90s, and he we got this really lowball offer. And he was incredibly upset and hurt. And I said, well, let's counter back. And he's like, no, I'm not even going to take them serious. So I called the other agent and I said, no, thank you. I'm going to send it back with a rejection.
Mhm.
And the agent called me back the next day and he said, well, aren't you going to counter? And I said, no, you might want to bring your highest and best and let's start over again. And sure enough, come to find out, it was a guy who'd been a used car salesman all of his life. And he said, I always do that. I give a very low ball offer because you never know when somebody might take it. But he said that was the first time nobody had ever countered back. But we ended up getting for the house what my seller
And you know what?
needed.
And that just proves to you too that there are all kinds of negotiation tools. And like, I say never do that, but in that case, it worked. I mean,
Mhm.
and again, our job is to facilitate what that client wants them to do. I want to talk them through it, but at the end of the day, I'm going to do what I am doing, their work, not mine. So yeah, it's important to do that, and to do it in a professional manner, because you don't know how it
Mhm.
will end up. So
And I don't know if you do this, but a lot of times when we're in the negotiation, I'm not changing the contract every time I'm sending something back,
mhm.
but I do it through text message
So there's
because
written.
there's
You know, I
written
do too.
proof, legal. It can be used as a
Plus,
legal
my
document.
brain, I mean, when you start going to so many numbers and so many details and changes, it can be, and it's really easy for someone to say, "I didn't say that."
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of that negotiating back and forth. Even if we have a conversation,
hmm
then I text it to them. Okay, here's what I understand your offer is.
Recap. Yep.
Yeah. And I even on my offers now, because things got so crazy in 20 and 21, that I now have a cover sheet that says, here's the price we're offering. Here's the
Yeah,
earnest
I like
money.
that.
Here's the closing date. Here are seller concessions.
hmm
So things don't get lost on a
I
line
also
that
even
maybe
like
they
it
didn't
when you
look.
put the dates, like what would be I mean, once you get an agreement, what's the effective date? What is the last of the, like, go ahead from the beginning and state, these are the dates we agree that the
Mhm.
contract is, because the contract kind of is like 3 days past the last signing and then 10 days or the business days. And so getting those dates really lined up so everyone's on the same page from the beginning, it's really smart.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. And when I turn in a contract, I usually have a little wait time before inspection starts. So I do put that date on there.
hmm
So let's talk about the next one. So you get
Yeah.
a contract, you're satisfied with, let's say
The
you just,
terms have been agreed upon.
yes,
Yeah.
everybody's agreed. Generally, I will then put a date in there of when inspections start.
hmm
So during this time of inspections, which here in Oklahoma, the buyer has 10 days. I put in my contract 10 business
And
days.
sometimes they go for it and sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
But I do.
Yeah.
I do too.
Yeah.
What the heck was that? I did.
But so you have 10, I put business days,
hmm
and
And then you
then,
really have 3 days past the last signature according to the contract. So you're almost getting 2 weeks to get back to them. Now, that doesn't mean you want to use that amount of time. If you can get it done quicker, that's optimal, because you're trying to close typically in 30 to 45 days. And then by the time you figure out what all is wrong and you agree to that, because then they have to get bids and they have to agree to it, then you have to have the work done.
right.
I mean, it's a lot to get done in that amount of time. So it's interesting. It's like you try to get as much time in the contract so that if something is different or a problem getting it inspected, you're covered. But that does not mean that that's ultimately how long we're trying to take. And
Yes.
sometimes with buyers, you have to really remind them of that, because they feel like, well, I've got 14 days to decide what I want them to do, which in theory you do. But then you also are trying to close 16 days after that's finished,
Mhm.
and the seller has to both negotiate with you and agree what they're going to do, and then they have to get the work done. Which, I mean, if anyone has tried to get work done lately,
Yeah.
and people want to get bids, and then it's kind of crazy
Yeah.
but we do get it done most of the time. I mean, it does happen. And your agent sometimes will handle some of that for you. A lot of times you handle it. There's all different kind of ways to do that. I mean,
And that's actually in the contract. You check, yes, I want my
Mhm.
agent to, sign,
Arrange
set
for
up all
the,
the
yeah, inspections.
inspections.
But as far as the repairs themselves, so let's just go through that. I'm going ahead of myself. So you go through the inspection period, and then you get the reports back. You review them, then you review them with your agent, and then you prepare in Oklahoma what's called the TRR, which is a treat, repair, or replace. And so it's like treat for termites or not, repair or replace these items that are an issue, um, and or remedy. But I mean,
Mhm.
that it's so then you agree what those things are going to be between the buyer and the seller.
Which is
Once,
another negotiation.
yeah, and the seller has 7 days. You can see the times don't really add up,
No, they don't.
but they have 7 days to get bids and then get back to you with what they will agree to do. So, I mean, you're almost into, like, if you do 14 days plus 7, you're almost into 3 weeks with 1 week left to really
Right.
get things done. So again, we don't try to take that time, but sometimes we have to, and it's in there for that.
And during those 17 days, the 10 inspection days and the 7 days for the seller to get bids, the buyer can back out for any reason, and they decide they don't like the color of the front door. They get their earnest money back if they leave
According
during,
to the contract.
yes,
Both parties must agree in the state of Oklahoma on who receives the earnest money. It's a little bit easier to for that to happen without much issue in that period because it's an agreed upon question mark period. Um, but yeah, I mean, and it's kind of it's just the way it's set up, and it's a fair thing. There's no such thing as is really in the state of Oklahoma because you have the right to inspect.
right.
Now, once you've gone through inspections and you say, yeah, we're taking it as is, where is, then you're locked in. So,
Right.
but yeah,
And you kind of, you're kind of taking it as is, but then you're doing these inspections to figure out what you do need to have fixed. Now, what I tell my buyers is, if there's an outlet that doesn't work, let's not concentrate on the small things. Let's see what bigger issues there may be.
Well, and that's the problem you run into too, is that you have so much of the time the buyer wants everything fixed, and the seller wants to fix nothing, and it's difficult. I mean, that's where you have to have some real good negotiations, and you have to set people, expectations where they need to be. Um, I think it just really depends on the property. It depends on the situation. It's very different. I mean, we keep doing it, we keep making it happen, but doesn't mean we don't do it with a lot of pushback on both sides. And then the other thing that's been kind of bad is that there was a real move to not do repairs during the pandemic because people were just kind of taking houses as is. So now we really need to be doing inspections, and we need to really be fixing things because now you're going through 2 and 3 cycles of not much work being done on homes. And the real thing about that, it's actually a really good thing that we do that because it keeps houses in town fixed up and up to standard. Doesn't mean if you have an old home and they come in that you have to bring everything up to code. And that's one thing people misunderstand. Like, if a house is an old house, it needs to be safe, obviously, but does not mean that everything is required to be brought up to code. That's not fair, because to redo a house, you have to rebuild like an old house to do that.
And sometimes, if maybe somebody is, single seller and not a handy person and doesn't really want to take care of that, you can actually do money in lieu of repairs.
Sure, absolutely. And that's a loss. That's also a lot of what happened before. And what happened a lot of times before is that they do the money in lieu of, and then no one did the repair, and now they're like trying to sell it. So it's a catch-22. I mean, actually, I love it when we decide that, because it's the other side is that the seller is trying to get the work done, and they're not going to live in the house, so they're trying to get it done, kind of the most inexpensively that they can. And the buyer would want the work to be done to the standard of the house they're going to live in. So getting the money can be a really great option. The problem is that, again, the seller thinks it should be the amount of money that would be the lower end of the bid, and the buyer thinks it should be the money. So you got to negotiate to where that level is going to be. So
and inspections have changed too, because when you were before I got into real estate, it used to be, we'll do up to $2,000 in repairs. Like, you had a set amount that people.
There's a problem though, and the reason why that went away, so in the contract you would state buyer and seller agree that the seller will do up to, like, let's say $1,500 in repairs after the inspection has been done and the TR has been decided. But the problem was that word "up to." So the seller was committed only up to $1,500. It was kind of good because it made the seller say, yes, I will do. Because right now a seller could say, do inspections, but I'm not doing anything.
Right.
I mean,
I've got one of those right now.
I had that option. And so then the sad thing about that is the poor buyer has invested all this money in paying for inspections in a house that is not theirs. And then the seller doesn't want to do anything. And that's not really, I do think that there should be an agreement of some type beforehand. If the buyer is going to invest in those inspections, that the seller is going to say, yes, I will make things right that need to be made right to a certain degree. So that was good. The problem we ran into is that buyers felt like that meant they got $1,500 at minimum, and sellers believed that that was all they had to ever spend. And so if you had something bigger come up, the sellers would push back, no, I just agreed to 1,500. And if it wasn't a lot found, then the buyers would get upset because they'd be like, well, I want to use that other money as closing costs or something. Well, that
Right.
wasn't what it was for. So it just became a blurry thing. But then what's happened is now, so much of the time, because there's not that number, buyers think that every single thing that's on the report should be done. And buyers think that they have no, sellers think they have no responsibility to do any of that a lot of the time. So it's caused some confusion. It's hard to know what the right thing is, and it'll probably change back. There used to be, it was the first quarter of 1% of the sales price was
Oh.
paid by the buyer, and so the buyer actually agreed to the first quarter of 1% of expenses on the repairs,
Mm-hmm.
which gave them skin in the game to keep the price lower on the repairs, and it actually worked. I don't know
Interesting.
why we did away with that, because it was like, okay, I'm asking the seller to replace the roof, let's say, but the first quarter of one repair of 1% of the sales price, I'm going to pay towards that roof, and then they're going to pick up with it, whatever else. So yeah,
Interesting.
and we had a cap. So then you had that plus the seller had a cap.
Mm-hmm.
So
I just closed one that they figured out that the roof had to be replaced.
yeah, which is
So
not unusual.
each side came together and they each paid half.
Yeah. I mean,
And
that's where negotiate.
mm-hmm,
And again, the buyer wants to buy it, the seller wants to sell it. If you have one who doesn't really want to do either one, you can't win.
mm-hmm.
But if you've got two reasonable parties who that's what their objective is, you can get it done typically, if there's money there.
So after inspections, another hurdle is if the buyer has any type of loan, then the lender is going to want to do an appraisal on the house. In other words, if you're buying a $300,000 home, they want to make sure that it appraises
Mm-hmm.
for $300,000, and it's not really 250, and now you've overpaid
Yes.
on the
And you
loan.
can only, it has to meet that value of the agreed list price or sales price. So if it comes in lower, then the parties have to go back and negotiate. We keep
Mm-hmm.
coming up through that. They have to negotiate what they're going to do about that. And sometimes the seller takes the price down. Sometimes they meet in the middle and the buyer pays cash. They, halfway up. Sometimes a buyer will pay all of it if they think it's unfair. That doesn't happen very often. But yeah, it's a good thing. That's also one reason why people prefer cash a lot of the time, because they
Mm-hmm.
don't have the contingency of that. But if you're paying cash, a lot of people will put in the contract, it has to appraise too. And that's the reason why, because when they go to sell it, they want to make sure. And it is surprising sometimes. You do have those appraisals that come in and they really kind of knock the wind out of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way it is. And if you have an FHA appraisal, it sticks for 6 months with the house.
Oh yeah. So if it under
Yeah.
appraises, every FHA buyer is gonna
Mhm.
know.
And so if your agent is a good agent who's your listing agent, they're going to let you know, look, this house is an FHA house, most likely that's where it fits. If we sell to anybody else, this is what we're going to deal with. So let's deal with it now and figure it out. So
And a
yeah.
lot of times when those appraisers go through, it depends on the type of loan. For instance, conventional seems to overlook more things than a VA loan.
Mhm.
Wood rot is something that a lot of times they say you can't close until all of that wood rot
Mhm.
is fixed.
Yeah, with FHA, yeah. Yeah, I mean, actually, FHA isn't nearly as strict as they used to be. It's interesting.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. But
Yeah.
VA is still pretty strict.
Yeah, and again, you want houses to be, that's the government is saying. I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing because the government is saying if we get stuck with this because we're backing the loan, we want to make sure we have a product we can sell in, when it comes back to us. So
Mm-hmm.
it makes sense. I mean, it's not like anybody's trying to just create bureaucracy. And then the veterans have their own sort of standards of what a veteran can and can't do, which is respectful to veterans. So if you're a seller and you get a VA loan, I mean, you have to make a decision. Do you want to do VA loans because you have to pay certain things for the veteran? They cannot pay certain things. So yeah. So, and then also, the other thing about financing and that is that it can kind of kick you in the end. Like it
Mm-hmm.
can come up near the end when the appraisal comes in, and you can be almost to closing and you've gotten all the repairs and all the things. And then with FHA, oftentimes you do have things that you have to fix. So you have to kind of make sure the TRR and the appraisal agreement are coinciding so that you're not agreeing to one number and then you get hit with a bunch of stuff from FHA. So
And so all of these things are
why
going
you need
on.
an agent.
Yeah, are going on right in front of you. But there are some things happening going toward the closing that you're not seeing. Oklahoma is an abstract state. We are one of 2.5 states that still.
2.5.
Yeah, it's like North Dakota or something. Only half the state requires it. There's
Interesting.
one state that it. Not all of the state
Well, look
does
at
that.
you, Professor Wizard.
I
didn't
know,
know that.
right?
I knew Iowa. No, but what's also funny is that it's cool because when those title, like stealing your title and all that, really can't do that here because, I mean, I think you can still do some stuff on people. You can get away with some stuff, but it's really not like you can just do that because the abstract has to be updated.
And so the title company
harder.
is working on that behind the scenes. And what an abstract is basically the history, the storybook of that property, who has owned it. It goes back to statehood, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
It's been a long time since I've looked at one, but anyway,
I wasn't around at statehood.
If it's changed hands a bunch of times, it's going to be a lot thicker. I just sold.
It does go back to statehood because
property.
because they I mean, it goes back to the whole the origin. I mean, I think that it may be very vague in the beginning because all the additions were sort of done and they just sort of did like a lump assessment of that that area. But yeah, you can. It's really they're fascinating to read.
They're very cool.
And it's also amazing too. Like I used to have older clients, like 15, 20 years ago that were like in their 90s or 80s, and they would have them in their floorboard. They would have them in between the floor and the ceiling of their downstairs, and like because they kept their books, but they were like they're $1,000 to have them built. So yeah,
and that's one problem I'm running into.
Most of them are stored, so that's good.
These days when you close, the title company will store it for you. So
you can choose to keep it though.
Don't.
Yeah, don't.
Because I just sold 4 properties for one family that they had gotten it statehood, have owned it all this time. Most of the properties they didn't even live on. And we couldn't find the abstract anywhere. We have no idea what great grandma did with that.
Yeah.
So
which is not uncommon.
Yeah. So sure enough, he's had to pay for 4 different properties to have those abstracts rebuilt. Luckily, because there was only one owner, it wasn't quite so bad. But yeah, you're going to have an abstract if you're here in Oklahoma.
It's a lot to research. And then also a lot of them they're bringing them up to date digitally. So they're translating.
I didn't know that.
So it is changing, but it's still going to be what it is. So yeah.
Yeah.
So that's happening, and the title company is doing all that, and people kind of go, I don't want to pay the title company. It's actually kind of unbelievable how little you pay the title company for all that they do. And that's really assuring that you're buying a property. The other thing too is they're running checks to see if there's anything. They're bringing the abstract up to date. So when the people bought it the last time it was put in storage, then they bring it up to right now. So how many things has there been a mortgage put on it? Has been a mortgage paid off? Have there been liens put on it? Are there liens on it now? Are there bankruptcies, divorces? I mean, things show up that the buyer or the seller don't even know were on there. And oftentimes they find things that they were completely unaware of, mechanics lien, somebody put a lien on their property and never released it, or they talked to a divorce attorney and then didn't end up getting a divorce, but that attorney put a lien on their house.
I just dealt with that.
Yeah, that's very common. So if you've gotten a divorce and kept your house, or you've been to the process and then got back together, you might want to check that because they have to get the attorney to take it off of there. They do it kind of prophylactically, I think, whenever they start with you, so that they make sure they're going to get paid down the road. So yeah, that's an interesting thing. There's all kinds of those little things, and that's what the title company. And a lot of times, the title company does a ton of stuff that no one even knows about.
Right. Well, and encroachments. They're also like I had a house, a very old house in Sapulpa, that had originally been a row of houses.
Oh, interesting.
And there were driveways in between 2 of the houses for both houses. Okay. So then you'd skip an area and then there'd be a driveway for 2 of the houses.
So shared drives.
Yes.
Which is common in Midtown too.
Yes.
That, yeah.
So somebody who had owned a bunch of the homes sold them and took them away many, many, many years ago. So this home has a driveway and then this big empty lot where the other houses had been torn apart. Well, the homeowner had decided the driveway was really cracked. So she had it pulled out and poured a new driveway. Well, it was on the next door neighbor's
Oh
property.
no.
And it was fine when it was the original driveway, but because she made the improvements to put in the new driveway, now she was encroaching on the neighbor's property. It was,
Wow.
oh my gosh, it was the biggest mess. And the person who owned the lots next door, like literally the title company was going through funeral homes trying to figure out who now owned this property because they kept passing
So
away.
crazy.
And it's just the what they had to go through was just crazy. But it did end up getting someone who said, that's okay that's on there. I'm not going to fight it.
Oh, I
It,
can't
it was
tell
the
you.
original
I can't tell you
driveway.
how many times I have gone on deep dives on Facebook, on Insta. I
Mhm.
mean, on trying to find people, and I mean, we have found some of the craziest things over the years. I mean, especially like when death and transference, and then one child who never was made aware that they own part of it, and then the siblings are trying to sell it, and you got to find that one. I mean, it can get
Mhm.
crazy, really
And
crazy.
heaven forbid the properties in probate, you're not going to be able to close until
Mhm.
probate is over.
Right. Yeah. And that's why, title insurance, you can buy title insurance, and it's really a smart thing to buy because you
Mhm.
buy it one time and it covers you for the entirety of owning the property. But if something comes up, then they will pay to have it, taken care of as best they can. But it can save you a lot of times. You can go ahead and close sometimes on properties because you had title insurance, so they can do a quiet title search after, or you're going to at least be covered to where you're not going to be in court trying to figure all this out and fight it and fight it, fight it. They're going to be there for you. But keep your policy, because that's not
Mhm.
something that they keep a copy of. You actually have to have the copy of it.
Oh, I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
So
Hmm.
always know what your policy is and have it available.
Interesting. Okay, so here in Oklahoma, we do not do anymore what we used to do, where buyers and sellers would be in the same room when it's time for closing.
And that's really because if it's cash, it can happen.
Mhm.
But if there's any kind of documents that are lender documents, it's a Privacy Act. And so that's really kind of why that has changed. But it's actually working out great because the seller can pre-sign, and then they can be getting out of the house, getting on down the road, instead of having to interrupt, come and do that, and then do the transfer. I mean, it has made it easier. It does. It's sad because a lot of times people want to be at the table with the people that they're giving the house to or taking the house from. But
And I love pre-signing. I really suggest, if you are a seller, pre-signing.
Mhm.
You just it just makes things easier. Okay, I know the seller has signed. Buyer can't sign until closing day.
Mhm.
But it just seems to make things go
And basically,
better.
you're signing everything, and then if the closing goes through successfully, then there'll be a settlement statement, which you've already seen. If there's any changes to that are in any way material, then you'll be notified. You give the go ahead that it can be signed by the closing company on your behalf.
Mhm.
And then so then you're done. Yeah, it's kind of amazing. It's amazing how all this goes as smoothly as it does.
Yes.
And we sometimes do a bad job of letting as the public, what all goes into it, and it does look sometimes too easy, and that's kind of where we are, where people go, well, y'all just make all this money and don't do anything. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts that go into it, but again, you just have to have the right people on the right teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, experience and a good brokerage, I think, really does make a difference.
Absolutely.
So, okay, so we've talked about title. We've talked about, and you mentioned the settlement statement. So, one of the things that you're going to do when you do get the contract, you've decided, okay, this is the deal we're going to go with. The seller gets a net to seller.
Yep.
And the buyer gets a cost to buyer.
Yep.
So and it's going to just be an estimate. The title company is going to come up with the exact final numbers, but you want to have an idea of actually how much you're going to be paying or how much you're going to be getting from the sale. And this will kind of give you an idea, so you're not shocked when you get the title settlement, and you're
Right.
like, what are these fees for?
And if you're buying and you're doing a lender, then you usually get a fee sheet, which is a lot of that. We used to call it a good faith estimate. Now it's like a fee sheet. That'll give you, because we don't really know what your loan structure and the
Mm-mm.
pricing of that. That's
Nor
really
do
a
I want to
different
know.
thing. Yeah. And we try to kind of keep arm's length a little bit with your finances and stuff, because really not our business isn't that. You're a loan person, unfortunately or fortunately, it has to be. But for us, as much of an arm's length as we can keep on that, we try
Mhm.
to protect your privacy and and that part of it. If you're a seller, there's pretty fixed costs for a seller. So that's not your, and then also it's important to remember, as a seller, you pay your taxes in arrears for property tax. So you're going to be giving the buyer a certain amount of money to pay that part of the taxes for when you lived in the house this year, when they pay at the beginning of next year. But that's going to be your expense whether or not you sell the house or not. So we always put that in that cost to seller or net to seller, because it is something that comes out of it, but it's really kind of a fee you shouldn't be thinking about as being a true fee, because it's not something that it would still be being paid whether you were doing the transaction or not.
Right. And, I get that a lot from buyers. They're like, hey, I just got this tax for last year. I only lived here half the year, and I have to take them back to closing. And remember, they actually credited you
Yeah.
that money from the seller.
Yeah.
You're not paying for the whole year if you didn't live there the whole year.
And if you're doing a loan, it's going to be out of your escrow. So it's going to typically be paid by your lender. And so you're not going to be actually paying that. But if you pay cash, you are going to be paying it.
So then, yeah, I always take champagne, or if my client doesn't drink, sparkling.
Now I look like a loser.
Sparkling soda. I love to have a party when we have a closing.
That's cute.
Whether it's pre-signing or the day of closing. It's a celebration. It's exciting whether you sold your property or whether you're starting a new chapter in a new home.
Yeah, it's a good thing. I mean, I think it's just so amazing to think about what it really means and how monumental it is. And I just had a young couple that bought theirs, and then he proposed to her right after in the house. I mean, it's really sweet, and it's kind of funny at this point in my life compared to other, like, now I feel like I see all these different phases as they're coming through, and it's really a cool thing to kind of go back and remember all of that too. So
And one thing to kind of throw on the end here, homestead exemption.
Yeah.
I think you have to file that by March 15th in Oklahoma.
Okay.
Pretty for sure it's March 15th. I did a post on it
Yeah,
around that
it's
time.
something really, and you know what? It really is. It's called homestead because it's protecting you for your homestead. It was developed for widows originally, so that they wouldn't lose their property. They it couldn't be taken from them. I mean, if you don't pay your mortgage, they can, but like for other things, it protects you. So for people, it's a real protector for bankruptcies, for a lot of different things, and then it also reduces your taxes by a little bit too.
Yeah.
So.
And you can buy a house different ways. You can have it in your legal name. You can have it in a trust. You can have it in an LLC.
And you can only have one homestead because you can only have one residential homestead.
No. Correct. Well, good. Okay. So now
Awesome.
we've gotten your property closed, and it really is, we try to make it as stress-free as possible. I always tell my clients that, I can't guarantee that it will be stress-free, but I'm going to try to be the coolest head in the room. And I try not to ruffle their feathers unless it's something that I do need them. Okay, I need you to be aware of X, Y, and Z.
It's a hard call because you want to sort of make it where it's pain-free as possible, but at the same time, you don't want to exclude them from their decision-making. I think that the biggest thing to remember is that the process is sort of a standard process. The way follow the contract is what we always say. It's pretty standard, but every house is different.
Yes.
So you're following a standard contract, a standard protocol, but you're having to put in different factors each time. So
correct. Yeah. Correct. All right. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. We enjoy this, and we hope that you do too.
I hope that explains a little bit too. Yeah, because I think that's, people don't really think about it because you don't do it every day. So it's good to just kind of be reminded if you haven't done it in a while, or if you're thinking about doing it, just how to get through it.
Awesome.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks,
well,
guys.
Thank you so much.
See you next
Bye.
time.